What's going on, guys? It's Mohammed, the host of Aware Alpha, and welcome to episode 84, 85. And I just want to say I'm feeling super grateful, super thankful for everything that's going on in my life. And, just having a platform to share my voice and bring guests that I'm aligned with and for them to share their message, their teachings, and everything that they're about. So today we have another awesome and special guest. She goes by the name of Sophie. She is a spiritual healer, and she just does a lot of great work with her clients, from healing their trauma, increasing their vibrations, and helping them really to become an aware alpha in this day and age. So with that being said, Sophie, welcome to the Aware Alpha podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. One of the first thoughts that comes to me right now is I feel like everybody these days wants to increase their vibrations, increase their frequency. Like I know some people may have watched the movie, The Secret, the laws of attraction, and they have kind of discovered these things, but they're not really well aware, because I feel like the laws of attraction is just kind of like a commercialized thing to just kind of get people intrigued, but there's no really deep lessons there or strategies or practical things to help you kind of start increasing your vibrations, right? Like you can think positive thoughts all you want, but like if you're dealing with stuff inside, like that's not going to really do much, right? But it's definitely something that keep you curious. So my question, or keep you intrigued to kind of fall deeper into this stuff. So my first question would be is, how could one increase their vibration and their frequency?
So on the awakening path, it is a path, and it is not all rainbows and unicorns and light and love. When you start to awaken, what it means is that you are starting to wake up from the illusion of just the third dimensional reality. That is basically means what I can see, what I can touch, what I can experience in the material realm is all that exists. When you start to wake up, you start to see there is more beyond what I can see, what I can touch, and what I can feel that is as real. And we start to move into the fifth dimensional reality. When that happens, more light starts to come into your being. And when that happens, imagine a dark room where you turn on the light. You see the mess. You see the dust, you see the dirty clothes, you see what's been going on in that room. And that's not a pleasant process, which is why I'm so passionate about spiritual healing, because you bring up a great point. People, I feel like the gateway drug into spirituality, for lack of better analogy, is manifestation. Is raising your vibration, is the law of attraction. It's what gets people's attention. And then we start to recognize that, oh my gosh, there is like deeper stuff going on here. If I want to manifest, then I really need to shift the crap that is vibrationally operating in me, so I don't manifest more of that. So I need to do work to actually clear my vibration in order to raise it so I can manifest the life I want to live. That is like a whole bunch of information in a nutshell, but I do manifestation work as stage 4 in all my work. We never start with manifestation for this reason, because people come in to the awakening path, they need healing. They need to address their inner child. They need to address their traumas. They need to address the way that cords are attached to them. They need to understand self-love. They need to embody soul love in order to really manifest their life and be able to raise their frequency, so they're vibrating at a new level, so they attract a new reality. It's a process. And when people try to spiritually bypass and just hop into the manifestation work without doing the other work, they can do it. But the example I like to give is, you may attract your soulmate, but if you haven't done the spiritual healing work, you may also attract the abandonment of that soulmate. Because if abandonment is an issue that you've been carrying for who knows how long, you could be carrying it for lifetimes, and you try to bypass it, it will find you. So great, you manifested your soulmate, and great, you manifested a huge soul wound that now has your attention. So preferably, I would like to find the soul wounds, deal with them first, so that when I manifest, I can really manifest the stuff that is going to light me up and help me get into the energies of flow and creation.
That's amazing. And there's so many things, awesome things that you said there that really resonated with me. So one thing that you mentioned about abandonment just now, right? That if somebody has abandonment, a trauma, and you said lifetime. So are you saying that somebody could have abandonment trauma, not just from this lifetime, from their mom, but like from, like lifetimes way before they were in the physical realm?
Yes. So I mean, I think it's important to kind of talk about the beliefs, right? Mac, down now.
We have Sophie and we have her dog on the podcast for anyone that's listening.
Yes, I have a 12-year-old pit bull and a 1-year-old pit bull. Okay. And they're great, but they require a lot of management, and we are in an active training thing. Anyways, so back to your question on the lifetimes. So I believe that we are these souls that can't, I mean, this is like, this lifetime on earth here is like a parentheses in the midst of a sentence, in the midst of a paragraph, in the midst of a chapter, in the midst of a book, on one shelf in a library. Like, that's how big we are as souls. And this one parentheses of this lifetime is just a teeny glimpse of your soul experience. So we come to earth because we're attracted to doing this kind of work, I guess, being a human. And I say, I guess, because it's not factual, but I guess it's very attractive on the soul level because of how quickly we can face and heal. And when we're in spirit, where there's no matter attached, it's just not as easy to create and heal so rapidly. So we want to come here, we want to incarnate into a body, but we do so with programs and patterns and soul wounds that we are trying to work out. So then we manifest, we're constantly manifesting. We manifest stuff that's going to stimulate those soul wounds so we can deal with it. Because that's part, I believe, of the bigger purpose of being here, is not only to live out your purpose and your mission and make an impact, but it's to heal on a karmic level the stuff that you've been carrying around for lifetimes that you no longer need.
I love that. So I have so many questions here, but another question I want to actually ask right now is, they say that we choose our parents, right? I've heard this saying that, like, even our parents, like, we chose them. I still haven't really understood this concept. I wonder if you have some thoughts on this. Like, how was I came physically, if my mom and dad didn't become together and, had sex, like, I wouldn't be here. But then they say that I actually chose my parents. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, if you have any feedback on that.
Absolutely. That's right up my alley
Awesome.
Got a lot to say on that one. So in the third dimensional reality, yes, your parents needed to come together to create your physical body. But your soul, I believe, chooses everything. You don't just choose your parents, you choose your gender, you choose your body, you choose things you have going on in your body. You choose where you were born, when you were born, the climate you were born into, everything. It's like, from a spiritual soul perspective, we can see the dynamics, like kind of like a game. We can see the game. We're like, ooh, I want Monopoly. Oh, I want checkers. And so we pick the group, the tribe that is playing that game so that we can come in through that and then get stimulated, get triggered, get the trauma, get all the stuff that is going to trigger us into action ultimately. And triggers are not the only way we can grow. It's one of the ways we can grow. Pain is a great teacher, but it's not the only teacher, but it is a common teacher that most people are used to. So we choose our parents, and our parents are able to give us, I like to say, 50% of what we need. And they don't give us 50% of what we need, because that's what we came here for the world to teach us. And so we as a soul are attracted to that team, that tribe, that game. We choose it, we come in through it, and then we come in fresh, and then we just get, beat up and, pushed around by the world, and we have experience, and we get hurt. Every soul, no matter who you are, there's no preventing it. And it's that experience that creates contradiction or creates contrast that we start to learn, and then we start to make choices, and those choices then affect everything going on in us vibrationally, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually.
That's amazing. And I love how you said that, because I feel like when you look at it like that, you don't have any resentment towards, let's say, your parents, but you look at it as like, I was put on this planet to heal and to go through this work. And my parents are just lessons, and they are, you know, like it's just all part of this big game, where like sometimes when you start to like realize that you grew up in a dysfunctional family, you have all this trauma, mom and dad didn't love you, they're like they're supposed to, sometimes you could almost have this, like at the beginning of your inner work, you could have like this hate towards mom and dad, but really when the way you just said it, it put the perspective of like, no, like my soul chose these parents, and I'm actually, this was supposed to happen the way it happened. And it's not their fault either. It's so it just comes from love and forgiveness and kindness. And I love that, the way you mentioned that. So I asked how to increase how do you increase your vibration and your frequency? And you mentioned that, well, once you start to want to do that and you start to do that work, you turn a light on in the room, and you also start seeing the mess and everything else like that. I love that analogy. So now let's say that somebody's like, yeah, I want to increase my awareness, increase my vibration. Practically, how do they start to do that? Because yes, once they start to increase their vibration and awareness, they do start to turn a light on overall, and they discover all the mess as well. But like, what's the practical thing that one can do to start to increase their vibration to discover the whole light in the room? Like, what are some of these practices that somebody could do on a practical level? Like myself, I spent 10 days in a silent meditation retreat. After 10 days, I came out, I went into it, I started meditation, because one of my mentors was like, like your mind is all over the place, you can't sit in one place. So I was going into meditation to just start to think clearly. But after 10 days of getting out, boom, 3 months later, I'm seeking a therapist, I'm crying, I'm journaling, I am discovering so many things. And this was like 3-4 years ago. And ever since then, I have done inner work, inner child work, ego work, shadow work. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago, right? So I'm curious to hear on your end, like, what are some practical things one should do to start increasing their awareness, to be able to light the whole room and to discover what's in this whole room?
Well, I think you bring up such a great point, and that's not the easiest question to answer, because the spiritual journey is not a linear path. And when we want to make it linear and practical, we kind of cut out some of the magic, because it is a more organic space. But I think what your story illuminates is such an important point, that the second that you stopped being so antsy and just following your anxiety and your ego, all your stuff started to come up, right? And so then you had to see it. You had a choice. You said, I can either push this back down with the anxiety and those patterns and everything I was doing before, or I can face it. I can feel, I can journal, I can talk, I can deal with what is actually in me. And that alone changed your frequency, because now you weren't spending all this energy trying to push all this stuff down. You were actually no longer needing all that energy to push it down. It was coming out, you're processing it, and eventually the queue clears. I mean, we have to do, I believe you can do this work your entire life, because the more that you clean, the more that you're able to see and tweak and deal with. So, but it's not as severe as the beginning of the journey, right? It can be more like every week you catch something, every month you catch something, not like every hour or every minute. So bringing it back to that question of, how does somebody practically begin to raise their vibration? I think the first thing that they can do is start to use a reprogramming. That I say reprogramming instead of affirmations, because I think affirmations have a certain reputation that I like to stay on kind of the outside of. I think affirmations typically fall into the category of putting Band-Aids on broken bones. And reprogrammings, in my 4 R's method, which is what I teach the spiritual life coaches that I certify, is based on this method that I created, which is recognize, release, reprogram, radiate. Those are the 4 phases that people walk through from wounded to freedom. And so they're not linear though, right? They can hop around, they can switch because this isn't a linear path. So the reprogramming, the first thing that I would say is the most important is 3 words that someone just starts to repeat. And I'll tell you why after I tell you what the words are, why this is so important. But the words are, I am safe. I am safe. At first, you may not believe it, but just start saying it, because when we're in the reptilian brain, which is the bottom of the brain, all that brain does is fight or flight, right? And so it's constantly looking for, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So if people struggle with anything chronic, depression, anxiety, frustration, agitation, chronic like inflammation or disease or whatever it is, your brain is probably in the reptilian zone saying, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? So when you're in the reptilian brain, that's all you can see is, am I safe or am I not safe? Am I safe or am I not safe? Now, if we understand the brainstem and how it works, once we know we're safe, we come into the limbic system, and the limbic system says, I feel. That's when we start to process emotion. After we process the emotion, which typically only takes 90 seconds, we come into the neocortex. This is where your tools are stored. This is where choice comes from. So if I'm in the reptilian brain, I can't make a conscious choice. I'm going to make a choice based on safety and safety alone. And that may be a pretty primal choice that I make. But if I know that I'm safe, I've processed what I'm feeling, and I can come up to the neocortex, that's when I can choose. When I choose, I have power. And that's what most people are seeking, is empowerment, right? So we talk about raising your vibration, and I talk about owning your power. Like getting back, and you were given this power. You don't need nothing is outside of you. You are a powerless, amazing micro being that is a little droplet of God walking around in this bio bodysuit. You have everything you need. You have all the energy you need and all the power you could possibly need, because I believe God lives within. So it's in there. It's not out here. So if we learn how to use our power, contain our power, channel our power, we feel powerful, which is what most people are seeking.
That's amazing. I love that. I love the way you explained that. So now that we're talking about a soul level and a spiritual level, right? How does childhood trauma and inner child work and the ego work and all these things where I feel like are just on the physical level of just this physical human experience, right? So what are your thoughts on those? I know that you also, like, in a way, help, like you already mentioned, like to increase your vibration. Like you, of course, you end up discovering that, heal your triggers and heal your childhood trauma and all this stuff, right? So I'm just, before I even ask any deeper questions, how do these play into the spiritual awakening, like your childhood trauma and all this stuff? Like, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I feel like they're completely spiritual. The traumas that we have experienced in this life are messengers showing us the energy inside of us that needs to heal. So if you really believe that you're a co-creator, you're a conscious being, co-creator, this is a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. But what if you attracted your traumas? And I know I'm going to get, feedback and pushback from that. Why would I attract being raped? Why would I attract, and these are some of the most horrific situations. But if we don't start there, let's not start at our 10s. Okay. Yeah. That's the tendency, is that people want to go there. They want to give you your resistance and talk about the worst case scenario. Let's pull it back a little bit to just a basic daily experience. We are attracting, we are pulling into our life that which will stimulate the awareness that we need to evolve as a soul. That's what I believe. So I also believe this equation. Life presents us with information and messages. If we don't get the message, it turns into a problem. If we don't address the problem, it turns into a crisis. The crisis is left unresolved. It turns into chaos all over our lives. And my goal is to help people learn to live on the level of information and messages. That's it. So that you don't have to have that level of pain to be taught, to grow, to evolve, to become aware. So going back to the inner child work, the trauma work, the shadow work, the ego work, it's all, to me, it's all a part of the spiritual healing path. It's all a part of recognizing the density. So trauma on the third dimensional level looks like victim. He hurt me. And then I stay in a state of victim. What victim ultimately means is I don't know what to do with my power. So I give it to you. And then I get mad that you have it. So trauma on the third dimensional level leads to victimhood. Coming out of victimhood is a lot of the work that we do in our programs. It's a process. It's a process for a lot of people, but ultimately it's learning to contain your own power and taking responsibility fully for your experience and your life and doing the healing work so you can free yourself from the tormenting energy that surrounds the trauma or surrounds the childhood or surrounds the traumatic experience or surrounds the shadow that you try to keep hidden and buried. So I think it's completely braided into the awakening path. I don't think you can awaken without doing it. That's why I call myself a spiritual healer, is because we have when you start to awaken, you have so much work to do and you're going to see it. And the difficult thing is you can't really run from it. Once that veil starts to get pulled, you can't really pull it back down. You can try, but you can't really.
To drugs and, a whole bunch of stuff, I feel like you can forget about it again, but I don't think you can really, you can't escape from it. And I say that I feel like from personal experience, just like once the room lit up, it was hard to make it dark again. It's like, no, like, holy crap. And I think I just have that curiosity and I'm intrigued and I've always been very obsessed with just being a better version of myself. But I can't see anybody like once the room lights up and you see the mess that you try to kind of, I think if you can make the dark in the room again, but now you're like, I know there's a mess over there in that corner and I didn't clean it up and I'm just trying to ignore it. Right. So it's interesting. So, a lot of this work happens when we're really following our intuition, like following our heart. But when you're on the third dimension, or like, if you haven't awakened yet, let's say, it's hard to really follow your intuition because you can't really know what is intuition and what is fear, right? Like when you're listening to this voice, what is your thoughts on, let's say, how could somebody become aware of that this voice right now is not fear and it's intuition? How do you separate that? How do you have the understanding to separate, okay, this is not fear talking, it's actually my heart and my intuition talking? And then we're like, no, this voice is fear, like this is fear and trauma and stuff like that. How would you separate, how would you start to understand what is fear and what's intuition talking?
Well, it's a process, first of all. So you need to be patient with yourself. And it's something that you learn. It's like learning a language. So people, if you want to speak Mandarin, like you've got to go through a process. You have to learn the characters. You have to learn the sequencing. You have to learn what the language is about. And then you ultimately put it together. So the first thing is be easy with yourself, because this is learning a language and it's an invisible language. So it doesn't have the barriers and the constructs that our brain typically wants to be able to understand something. So that's the first thing. The second thing is intuition, I believe, speaks in the body, not in the head. You may hear it, but this is where the language, knowing the language, like learning to hear spirit, hear spiritual information is different than chatter. So this is why becoming more intuitive is a part of the awakening process, because as you do the healing work and you silence your chatter, you're able to drop into your body and you know the difference between listening to your mind and listening to your heart and listening to your gut. You can feel those different centers through meditation, through consciousness and awareness, then you can start to drop out of your head, right? And I can drop out of my head and drop into my heart. And then I can ask myself a question that leads to, and I say it's simple. At the beginning, it leads to one of three answers: yes, no, or wait. You don't ask open-ended questions to your intuition. You ask very simple questions. So you start there and you make sure you're in your heart, and then you feel it. Try to turn off the head. Too many people are stuck in their head and it's way too loud. So you want to feel the information, not listen for the information. That's the first thing. Then once you start to feel the information, you need to know your intuition won't scare you. It doesn't feel bad. Even if it's a no, it won't scare you. Fear, the mind will scare you. That's when you know. To me, that's the biggest thing. Even if my intuition is telling me to do something that's hard, it doesn't feel scary. It feels like aligned, even though it may not make sense. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? I know I have to. So there's a clear knowing, which is clear cognizance. So again, it's a process. It's a journey. It takes time to develop and learn that language, but it's 100% possible.
That's amazing. No, that's good right there. I feel like we should charge for that one. So I'm very curious, how did you how did you get into the space? How did you start to what made you get into this industry in a way or so? And I asked that because, when you talk to a psychologist or a doctor or someone, it's like, they went to school, and then after school they were like, well, I'm gonna start doing what I went to school for, right? But I noticed a lot of authentic coaches and healers, it wasn't like that. It was like they went through something that caused them to have their own awakening, and then they were like, man, the world needs to know about this stuff, and then they decide to start sharing that, right? So I'm curious to hear your story, what caused you, what inspired and intrigued Sophie to become a spiritual healer?
Yeah, so my story kind of starts probably about 20-ish years ago. I was stressed out. I was anxious, depressed. I was also an empath that didn't know it. So I didn't know what energy was mine and what energy wasn't, which is very, very confusing as a young adolescent. I turned to food, drugs, and alcohol to help soothe some of this stuff. But as you can imagine, that made me very chemically imbalanced. I ended up turning to bulimia to try to help manage my overeating. And it was Easter 2001. I had a divine intervention. I didn't know I was going to have an intervention that day. I had just come back from spring break, from Jamaica. I had braids in my hair, seashells in my hair, went to church in New Jersey. And they preached on a start of new beginnings. And deep down in my gut, my heart, I knew I needed to change my path. I knew something was off. And I was like, man, I need a new beginning. And so later that day, I was out on the back porch with my mom chatting, and it spilled out of me. If you know anything about bulimia, it's a secret, right? No one knows that you eat to soothe and then you throw up your food. It's a secret. And that's part of the pattern that makes you feel this false sense of management or control. And I just confessed to my mom. I was like, I am eating, I'm throwing up, I'm doing drugs, I'm drinking. I am such a hot mess and I don't want to live anymore. And it just poured out of my mouth. And I was like, what did I say? And I believe that was the beginning of my spirituality. Something in me poured it out. It wasn't necessarily my neocortex making a choice. It was something greater, which is why I call it a divine intervention. And what ended up happening, the sequence of events that happened after that moment changed the course of my life, because I didn't know it at the time, but my mom leaned forward and said, okay, you have 3 weeks of school left. I need you to not throw up your food, not do any drugs, not drink any alcohol for 3 weeks, just 3 weeks. Can you make me that commitment? And I always knew the power of my word. That's something that I always was very aware of. And I gave her my yes. Again, it just kind of came out of me. I was like, oh crap, what did I just commit to? The very next week was a party week at our school, and I was a designated driver. I was sober and I was driving around. And the next morning I was woken up out of my bed with the news that one of my friends was killed in a car accident the night before. And sitting at her funeral, I felt God's words pierce my ear and say, you've been given a second chance. What are you going to do with it? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't know. I went after that, I went into therapy. I had some mild improvements. And then I found life coaching. And I found it through a TV show called Starting Over on NBC, and watched and recorded with a VCR every episode, did every lesson they talked about. It was a TV show, you know, but I tended to be one of those people that really used my resources and used the information that was present to me in whatever format it came in. And within 6 months, I was really dramatically changing. And I can remember, you know, at one point laying in bed in the middle of the night and just crying out to God and saying, God, I'm in a dark place. And if you help me save my life, I will dedicate my life to helping other people save theirs. And that's my why. That is my commitment, because from that moment that I reached out to God, God entered my life. I ended up going to church and having a strong relationship with Jesus, came down to Florida, went to Christian college, was ridiculed for my spirituality. I didn't fit in. I love Jesus and the chakras. I love to meditate and have crystals and read the Bible. And people could not wrap their head around that. They thought I was something weird. So I was rejected from that community, did a lot of healing work on that, but stayed true to my spirituality, stayed true. I have a very strong relationship with Jesus to this day, a strong relationship with God, strong relationship with the universe. I believe in spiritual respect, which means that I don't care the terminology or the religion that you use to connect to divinity. All that I care is that you do. That you know you are loved by a source so much greater than any of us. It's living within you. And that is my purpose, to help people remember that spark of the divine that lives in their heart right here, right now. It's alive. And I, you know, because I don't go to church and you can't really put me in a box, people are kind of, I definitely have a community around that gets that and loves that. But then there's also a lot of people that don't get it because they want to put me in a box so that they can understand what I'm saying. But I live outside of that box. So I don't have a construct around me spiritually. And anyways, that's my why. That's how I got to where I'm going. You know, I completed my undergrad in psychology. I went back to school later on and got my master's in transpersonal psychology. I did not want to get a clinical degree. I did not want to study neuroses. I did not want to study why we're so broken and what that means and what that looks like. I wanted to study human potential. And that's what transpersonal psychology is. It's beyond the person. What happens when a person has healed? What is their potential? Where can they really go? How can they thrive? How can they soar? That's what I wanted to study. So my degree really helped me really understand the healing work and the thriving work, which I think traditional psychology really misses out on. You know, it's all about like getting to stability, but what happens after stability? Where do we go? And that's what I wanted to study. And that's those higher vibrations. And that is the higher dimensional realities. So, yeah.
No, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I am curious to hear. So you end up having, you know, pretty much after those 3 weeks of school, right, that you committed to your mom that I'm going to finish it and I'm not going to, you know, do the drugs and everything like that. And in the next 6 months or the next year or the next couple of years where your life drastically changed, right? And you're watching the, you know, those life coaching stuff and the recording stuff in the VCR. I'm curious to hear, like, what were some practical things that you start to do in those 6 months and 12 months that changed? You know, was it like you start to journal things, you start to sit and meditate? Like, what were some practical things that you did that made that change from where you are to where you ended up, going?
Well, that's one reason why I love life coaching, because life coaching always leads to some type of activity or exercise that is really transformational. But yes, I started journaling. I started practicing self-love. I started recognizing my mindset and the power you have to shift your mind, your thoughts. A book that is really transformational in that space when you're going from kind of darkness to light is The Power of Now, and really by Eckhart Tolle, who really helps you grasp what is happening in your mind and how to really shift it, how to shift that energy. I started meditating. I started understanding more of the chakras and my energetics. I started feeling safe. So I was then able to make more conscious choices and get in tune with what I really wanted, not just what I was living. So yeah, those are some practical concept steps.
I think you mentioned I learned how to shift my thoughts or shift my mind, right? How does one start to shift their minds or shift their thoughts? Because I always say, and like, once again, like, I'm like no guru or anything like that. I'm just like, so I always thought like, I'm not my thoughts. They just keep coming, and and I don't really have any control in controlling my thoughts. Like, they're just going to keep coming. And it sounds like there is, like, I do have, from what you're saying, is that no, I could actually control my thoughts or shift my thoughts. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's not about control. It's about placement. So many people are so like, I am my thoughts. I am sad. I am annoyed. They're identifying as the thought feeling space. But what meditation teaches us is to become the observer. So we practice detachment. So if I am the observer observing a thought, what is thought? It's an energy. And I am not that energy. So what am I? Who am I? That's the spiritual awakening part. And so then there's a lot of techniques and tools that you can use that I teach my students and clients on how to get control of the chatter so that you can come into the present moment. It's one of the first activities that we do in most of my courses is teaching that technique and that application. But recognizing ultimately, if I am observing, like, how can I like to say, or what Wayne Dyer used to talk about is when you realize that you are the commander behind the command center, things shift. So I can practice detachment. The thoughts still come, but am I following them? Or am I aligning with a different part of my inner being?
That's amazing. That's a level of awareness to get to, right? Like, I remember, I think Alan Watts is the first time I discovered, or like I heard something, and he's like, you're not your thoughts, you're the observer of your thoughts. And I remember for the next like 3 to 6 months, when my meditations, I would just like catch myself, like, like just sit there and observe my thoughts and be like, I'm not this thoughts. I think Ram Dass says too, it's like, if you're feeling depressed, it's like, oh, I'm depressed. It's like, no, oh, look, depression. Oh, look, anxiety. Oh, look, sadness. And look at it from that aspect of it. And I would have to say it was definitely a game changer for me those early days, because it was just like, you're like, wow, no way. Like, I am not my thoughts. What? Like, I've been my thoughts for so long. Like, I've been letting them really control me and run me in my life for so long, right? So you said transpersonal psychology is what you studied, right? I'm curious, from like an academic aspect, what does the academic world thinks of the soul and the spiritual world and the soul and all the stuff like do they still, like, in these books and what you study, like, do they still call it, soul and it's a spiritual awakening, or what are the words that they use? And like, I'm just curious to hear on your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the most respected psychologist in that realm is Carl Jung.
Okay.
That speaks this entire language, even with more depth than what we're going into today. And I mean, he's like number 2 in any psychology course when you start studying the psychologists that were kind of the founding fathers of psychology. It usually starts with Freud. This is what gets me. So Freud was a student of William James. William James is really the father of psychology. He was a med student at Harvard and started having depression and was like, what is this? And so he started searching, diving in. He was the person that had the first psychology class ever at Harvard University in like 1900, something like that. Wait, he doesn't even make the textbooks. This is what boggles my mind. He was so spiritual, so self-actualized, so deep, but yet our psychology books start with Freud, who talks about all this convoluted, strange concepts, in my opinion. I am not a fan of Freud. And the fact that our traditional psychology starts with him is really difficult for me, because it should start with William James, and it doesn't. But at least Carl Jung made it into the lineup, so to speak. Most people have never heard of William James. It is one of my goals to help his story get out, because it's just phenomenal. And I'm not here to tell his story. I just want to have people research and understand that psychology is such a beautiful practice, but it has been convoluted, because a lot of people who are attracted to psychology are hurting, which is a good thing, because they're being called to the solution. But because they're hurting and they're not, all the tools don't follow a practical linear path, you kind of can get scrambled and stuck in some of these philosophies and these things, and actually not do the healing work that you need to do. So academically, I would say there are psychologists and philosophers who absolutely use the language that I am using. And they are out there, and so I would just point to Carl Jung as the pioneer in what we traditionally recognize as somebody that connects spirituality and psychology.
That's amazing. I just, the word manifestation just came to my mind. So you mentioned that it's like the 4th level is when you start to talk about manifestation with your clients and your students, right? So how does this work? Like so you're saying that if you want to manifest and you want to, your desired life, your desired partner, all the stuff like that, you have to heal your traumas, or you're not going to be able to manifest?
No, you can manifest. You can manifest anytime. You just are going to also manifest density. So the idea is, when the light comes in and you start to see all the crap in that room, right? It's like trash piles. It's dirty laundry. It's dust over here. If you want to bring a guest into this room the way it is, that's your choice. Of course you can do that, but you probably want to clean up a little bit first and make it look its best, so that you're proud when your guest comes over. You can manifest. We're constantly manifesting. You probably manifested a drink this morning before you got on this call, right? We constantly manifest, and we don't give it the credit because we're such wonderful manifestors. What my message is do the work before you focus on manifestation, because it makes your manifesting journey and your experience with manifesting a lot more beautiful. So the progression that I take students through is typically a format of these 4 steps. The very first step, like the pre-step, is something called the sacred morning. And the sacred morning is going through, waking up early intentionally and really setting your intention through the day, and learning about self-love. And it's a 7-day experience. The next step on this path is embodying soul love, which is something that I believe in strongly. I have something called the Soul Love Mastery Method in my work. And that is about going beyond self-love and recognizing that the soul is love and it already vibrates inside of you, and how to really embody that in your life, in your world. So that's the first step, is embodying soul love. The second step is deep spiritual healing work, inner child and trauma work. And that's a 6-week process where you get to know your inner child, you help them feel safe, and you start to spiral trauma out of your energetic system. So you learn that. Third step is cutting energetic cords. Now, this work gets pretty advanced. Like, this is not for the faint-hearted. This is not for somebody that's never heard about spirituality. This is for somebody who is awakening and it is ready to go in their room and clean up.
Yeah.
So that's the stage of people that I work with. They're not like, what is that room? Or I don't want to go in that room. Those are not my people. My people are people like, I want to clean up my room and be ready for my visitors. So then we cut cords and we understand that everyone we connect with, everything we interact with, there's an energetic cord, and you're flowing energy and receiving energy. And sometimes that energy can be lovely and beautiful, and sometimes that energy can be toxic. So I teach people how to clear, cut, untangle, and alter their cords. And then we do an energetic activation where we only allow people to plug into the heart center. We're moving into heart-centered consciousness. So you basically unplug every cord that's ever been plugged into you and you reroute it through the heart. And I take people through an activation. And then the fourth step, after you've done that, you've embodied soul love, right? You understand how to have a spiritual, sacred morning practice. You embody soul love. You have done some trauma work and inner child work. You've changed your cords. Now let's figure out what you really want. Let's figure out what lights you up, what sparks your joy, what makes you feel like you're coming alive. And let's plant that into your subconscious. And let that vibration start to grow and become you, so that you can watch this magic start to show up at your front door. And then when it does, you have a clean room to welcome your visitor into.
That's amazing. Every time you talk, there's so many questions that comes off the top of my head, but I realize that we only have an hour. So what are your thoughts on psychedelics and healing trauma, and also psychedelics in the sense of using psychedelics or microdosing to, have the spiritual awakening, or to help you in the process of spiritual awakening and all that stuff? I'm curious to hear that.
So I'm a purist when it comes to this. I'm not called to it. I have no judgments on it. It's just hasn't called me. When I was doing drugs, I almost killed myself when I was on acid. And I opened up a part of my brain that it took me about 10 years to repair that part of my brain. I used to have these flashbacks. And so I'm not that attracted to it, because I did it irresponsibly, without a guide and without an intention or purpose. And so for me, it's just not that, it doesn't call me, right? So when people are into that, I mean, I know that it's a huge movement in the more progressive psychology space. People are doing all sorts of stuff. And I think if you have the proper guide, I mean, that's my biggest thing, is making sure you feel aligned with the guide. If you're going to do ayahuasca, if you're going to do microdosing, if you're going to do a psychedelic journey, your guide is so important, because you may go to a dark space in yourself, but if you have a guide that knows how to show you what you went there to find, without letting fear win. See, when I did it without a guide, I just let the fear win. And then I was with that fear. I unlocked that fear for the next 10 years, which is what they would call a bad trip. Right. But if I had a guide that was able to show me what I went into that dark space to find and unlock, I could have come back very awakened. So that's my stance, is you need to have a guide you trust fully, that you feel so aligned with, and that you're ready to go to some of these places in you that are shadows, because that is a piece of it. It's not the whole thing, but it is a piece, and it's a piece that meets a lot of people. So
no, that's true. Thank you for sharing that. So another question I have is, so I have a lot of crystal stones like all around me. I'm wearing a necklace. And in the last 2-3 years, I've just become very attracted to them. And like I said, I'm very heart oriented. If I'm called to something, I just go for it. And crystals have been something that I've been called to, and like I collect them, I cleanse them every week. And I'm just like, it's just become this ritual in my life. Yet I'm also somebody that, prior to all this 4 or 5 years ago, I was a skeptic when it comes to energy. Like I would hear people always, say like, man, like I can feel your energy when you walk into the room, like you are, and I always be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what do you mean? Like, like I'm well spoken, but like energy, like I was a skeptic of stuff like that, but I've only become more intrigued by it, and just become more like that it's the real thing. Like the energetic world is it's a thing, right? So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on, they say like crystals carry energy, right? And it's like, I'm just I'm just curious to hear what you think of crystals. Like, is there something to these stones? And, they don't have to be healing energy, but maybe they are, but I think it's what we believe. I personally believe it's like, if I believe there's something in here, then there's something in here. If I don't believe there's something in here, then isn't anything in here. So I guess it's just my own perception of it, or is there something to this without me thinking if it's there or not? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, because I see you wearing a bunch of stuff there, and I'm like she must know some stuff. So tell me what your thoughts are on crystal stones and the energy that they carry and all that stuff.
So in the third dimensional reality, this is just a rock. It's just a rock.
Yeah.
But in the fifth dimensional consciousness, this is a vibrating radio station. So I like to say it. Yeah. So if I'm in third dimensional consciousness and I say this is just a rock, it is. It's consciousness is the determining factor whether I will let the signal that this emanates into my field. So crystals have an organized molecular structure. Most matter that's created has a disorganized molecular structure. And because of that, it can transmute signal, right? Everything is energy. So it transmutes this signal that, or transfers the signal all the time. So like rose quartz is always humming, like I say, like unconditional love, it's humming it. In the third dimensional reality, if you believe it's just a pink piece of matter, you're not going to pick up on that signal. And there's lots of, we believe in the radio, right? The radio is something that you can't see, but you can tune a dial and receive a signal and hear a sound. Yeah. And so crystals are like that. That's what I kind of talk about them as, these little radio stations that hum these songs and these notes. And you having the openness to receive them and work with their energy is what gives you results. It's about you being open to them. And so we have awakencrystalgallery.com is our crystal jewelry website. Okay. But my goal in the website, not only do we have jewelry for men and women, but there's a search bar. And so I really wanted to have like a library, but the way that it just wasn't possible to do it. So the way that I encourage people to do it is, if you're curious about, like, let's say you're working on shame, and you really want to, so go into the search bar, awakencrystalgallery.com. There's a little magnifying glass in the corner, type in shame, and then it'll show you what crystals could help you with shame, or type in relationship, or finding love, or healing a broken heart, and just see what crystals are brought to your attention. And then you don't have to, you can purchase them on our website if that's calling to you, but you don't have to. You can actually work with the crystal energy without it being there, because it's just energy. You don't need the physical matter to work with it. So it's really cool. It's a really cool way to learn more about crystals and how you can use them on your healing journey.
No, that's amazing. I'm glad you shared that. The way you shared it too, it definitely makes a lot of sense. It's pretty much, like if you are open to it, you're going to receive something from it. Right. And so, when it comes to this physical body, like it's going to just, we come alive and then we die. But Ram Dass, I think he talks about there's no fear of death, because like this is just a trip, like you're just getting off the bus, but and then you're going to the next trip and next trip. So there's no reason to have any fear of this, right? So my question is that if I am, let's say when I die, does my soul, how does that work to I feel like nobody really knows, but it's just really opinions that we share on this, right? Some of us just have more understanding on the topic. So when I die, does my soul go into another person, another baby is born and then the soul is in them? Or is it it could be in a plant, it could be in a crystal stone, it could be a cat? What are your thoughts on that? On what happens to the soul when we pass away, when this body retires?
I think what happens, and this is from some of the deaths that I have witnessed more recently, like just in communicating with their souls, like real, like within the first 3 days after they pass. And what I've been able to see and experience is that we go into, after I call it graduate. So after we graduate, we go up and we get released from all the density, and we then go into a life review. And depending on where you are in alignment with like what you lived out in your mission, how much extra credit you achieved, you know, depends on kind of like where the bus will take you. And for me, I've seen colors. So it's like people will ascend their body. They go into kind of this holding pattern, and then they get on these, I see it kind of like as a rainbow. You have like a red bus that goes this way, and an orange bus, yellow, green. And so I've seen people like then take that track. And once they take that track to their life review, they're too far beyond. I no longer have contact with them. I just know they're on their next part of their journey. I also don't think that we make a turnaround like this. I think that we have time to process and choose. And so if you want to come back as plant energy, and that's a choice you make, maybe you do that, but I don't think it's immediate. It could be, because there's no time and space, but in terms of our reality, I don't think it's that quick. However, when it comes to animals, I have heard that an animal may come back several times to the same owner. And I actually think that with my dog, I had a dog before our newest puppy that died when he was 4. He got really bad lung cancer, and it was so devastating. It was such a devastating loss for me. But I did a lot of work spiritually, and I kind of knew where he was. And when I go back to that place, I just can't really find him. And I really think he might be in my other dog. So it's made me, I have like pictures of him in my house, and it's made me feel like I can take the pictures down because he's living here now and he's in a healthier body. So that's just my opinion. I know that must sound very out there for many, but I encourage you to take what you like, leave what you don't. Try not to judge it. Just know where you stand and what's true for you, because that's a healthier place to be than, you know, judging what doesn't feel like it's in alignment. That's just a waste of energy. So anyways, that's kind of how I feel.
No, that was good. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. The bus, you know, and then I think what really I like was that you don't like jump out of this and jump into something else. No, you get to have some like reflection time, and then like you choose where you go. And that makes more sense than like popping out of this body and going to the next body. It doesn't make as much sense. So no, that's amazing. As we finish off this podcast, please let everybody know where they can find you. And then I'm going to include all your details in the podcast section so people can reach out to you and everything like that.
Okay. So I am awakenwithsophie.com. That's where you'll find information on our spiritual life coach certification that we host for men and women. I do a lot of trainings with men. And we also have our sacred mornings that you can try, you know, to do seven days of your own sacred morning and learn how to really develop that routine. On Instagram, I'm Awaken with Sophie. On Facebook, I'm Awaken with Sophie. Those are my 2 major social media platforms. And yeah. awakencrystalgallery.com is our crystal website. Okay. And I think that covers it.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. I'm sure everybody that's going to listen to the podcast will definitely take something away from it. And yeah, just thank you so much for jumping on this podcast with me today.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And guys and girls, as we finish off this podcast today, you know, like I always say, I like to set some intentions, and my intentions are for you guys to become intrigued and curious about this information that we just shared today, and not only take it for entertainment purposes, but truly take something away from it and start to practice it on a practical level and start to really embody it in your day-to-day life. And my intentions are lastly for you that you decide to really realize that you do have the power. You are God. God is in you, and that you have all the power within you, and you can become your most aware self, and you can become your happiest, wisest self, and just life can only become better if you choose to commit to this work and to this process. So until next time, stay an aware alpha.